This week I have a special guest. My son Cameron is back from a missions trip to Papua New Guinea, and I thought we could see what he learned before he's off to Bible college this week. Welcome to Run with Horses. My name is Norman, and my goal is to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus. The spiritual life is both incredibly simple and potentially the most difficult part of your life. God invites you to live intentionally and on His mission. It's very cool that we get to do that together. Thanks for joining me today. If you're new to the show, you can find all of our past shows on our website, runwithhorses.net, or just about anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you've been enjoying the show, I would appreciate it if you would leave a review wherever you're listening. It helps others to find us. And as always, your questions, comments, and feedback are welcome. You can write me at norman@runwithhorses.net, or you can check out the Run with Horses podcast Facebook page. And now, on with the show. I've been beginning, for the last few weeks anyway, with a different habit that's good for us to develop if we want to follow Jesus well. Today, I want to focus on the habit of giving. And there is a lot on giving, and I'm not going to cover anywhere near all that there is in Scripture on giving. But I do want to look at two aspects of giving. Often when we think about giving, we think primarily about finances. And finances are certainly a good part of that. Hebrews 13:15 says, "Therefore, by Him let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to His name. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased." So here there's two things that are mentioned. First is the one we always think about, doing good and sharing. We want to give, to share, to help take care of people who are in need. That is part of the reason giving is so important. You give to help other people. But one of the things that we give, one of the sacrifices, is praise to God. We should give Him the praise and thanks that He deserves as God. It's not just our finances. And when we think about sacrificing, praising God, honoring Him, and what that means, 2 Corinthians 8:1 says, "Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us by the will of God." So here you have different kinds of giving, different kinds of sacrifice that are talked about. So they are talking about this in the context of a gift that was needed because there was a physical need. But in that conversation, they also talk about the gift of fellowship, giving of themselves to the Lord, and giving of themselves to others, to Paul, to his group. So I think you can even consider how Paul wrote and said that, we should live lives that are a living sacrifice. That's kind of what we're talking about. There is more than just finances. It's one thing to say, I want to give because there's need and I want to help. We definitely should have that desire and heart to do that. That's not all. God wants us, and He wants us to praise Him, give that sacrifice of praise, but also to give ourselves to others. So a habit to develop as a follower of Jesus is the habit of giving. And that's giving freely, giving joyfully of our finances, of our resources that we have that are helpful to others, but also to give of ourselves to God, to our church, and to others. Okay, Cameron's with us today. He has been back about a week from Papua New Guinea, and we had talked to him earlier about going, and then the trip going and then coming back. Maybe there's some lessons learned and some expectations that were not met, and some there were expectations that were not recognized maybe. So it's always different when you face the reality of a trip like that than it is when you're looking forward to it, particularly never having been to the country. So first off, just big impression. What was your goal again? Tell us, what was your goal for going to Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, originally, last summer I went to Bolivia, and that was my first try at doing medical missions. And I didn't have any medical training. I was just helping out, or basically however a normal person could. And it was enough that I wanted to try it again after I had gotten my EMT license. So I got my EMT license that next semester, and I was going to go again this summer, or yeah, I guess it was this past summer, to Papua New Guinea and try medical missions again. They have a clinic there, but actually use my EMT was my original goal.
And as in many things that we do in life, the plan ahead of time and the expectation were not quite the same. So just a quick summary, how did that go?
Yeah, ended up their clinic was 2 nurses, and the ambulance was for taking people who were really bad from their small clinic to a bigger hospital. So they didn't really have a sophisticated enough setup for like an EMT to be able to do a whole lot. So I ended up just observing a lot and maybe helping out a little bit in like the pharmacy, putting pills in bottles and packages, things like that.
Okay. All right. So then let's back up and have the big picture again. You had never been to Papua New Guinea before, but you had read a little bit about it and maybe talked to the field team leader there. Did Papua New Guinea meet your expectations, or were you surprised by, or what were you surprised by when you went to Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, I didn't really do a lot of research before I went, so I didn't have a lot of expectations like that. So a lot of people were like, oh, what do you know about Papua New Guinea? Like, do you know about this or this? I'm like, well, I don't know. I wasn't really concerned about that. I mean, so my goal wasn't contingent on what country I went to, and so it was just our Steve Mayo, our regional director over Japan. He recommended here, said he knows the first people there. They're really good, and I was like, well, why not help a ABW missionary instead of going with some other organization for a shorter term? Because one of the other goals was to be a little longer. So yeah, I didn't really care. It sounds weird, but I didn't really care so much about Papua New Guinea. I just wanted to go and do this medical mission. So with my expectations like that, I wasn't expecting a whole lot. I didn't know what to expect was kind of it. So I was maybe a little nervous because I didn't know what I should expect. But yeah, I wasn't quite as prepared for like some of the third world country realities, a lot of like the corruption and things, which makes a lot of the systems less efficient and good.
So did you learn a lot about that while you were there?
A bit. And like my flight was canceled from the capital of Papua New Guinea to the smaller town where I was supposed to go. Things like that you don't have in America or Japan.
At least not very consistently.
Yeah.
So your goal was to go and learn more about medical missions. Do you feel like you learned anything about medical missions, or did it answer any of your questions?
Yeah. And really, once I was there watching what they did, I just started having the question, well, because right now I'm an EMT, the next logical step would be paramedic going on from here. So my question was, seeing all these nurses doing things and what they're doing, it's like, well, a paramedic even is not really equipped for this kind of medical work. So I was just starting to wonder, like, well, is it more beneficial to be like nurse rather than a paramedic? And
you're just going to have to be a doctor, Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most helpful, but
yeah. You're not doing anything with 10 years of your life.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, so it just kind of, I started having those questions, watching what they did, and then I hadn't really thought about that before. I just assumed, well, I'm an EMT now, I'll go see how it works, and if I decide, I really like doing medical missions, then I'll go and get like a paramedic or something, and I can go back and do that. So this is the first time I really was faced with even the idea of, well, maybe that's not really that helpful, especially because, and like what they said is some countries have bigger hospitals that have more staff and they're more equipped for more things, whereas more like this is a really small country, so literally 2 medical people on staff that are really helping. And so, like, yeah, I mean, having just like an EMT or paramedic is just really not that helpful.
Right.
So
they really need a doctor is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is it's so hard to get even like medical supplies. Mm-hmm. I know that was one of the constant struggles they have. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I mean, the higher level, basically, the better. I mean, that's what they told me coming in was, yeah, the more you have, the more you'll use. And, but yeah, so really like talking to the head nurse there, Lori Smith. Yeah, she just basically told me, yeah, we don't really use those other things. And she came as just a registered nurse. And she found even that was not enough because there are no doctors to work under. So you have to be able to diagnose and prescribe medication, which nurses aren't trained for.
Right.
So what she said, he's at like the lowest level you want to get is a nurse practitioner who is able to diagnose and also give medication.
Mm-hmm. So in Goroka, where you are, is there a is there a public hospital?
Yes. Yeah, and what they told me when I got there is, we'd love for you to go and see the Goroka hospital, but don't touch anything. And there it is, I says, one of the worst places to go if you're sick is the hospital, because they don't clean well, the hygiene is not good, so you can get a lot of stuff in the hospital. And really how the people use the hospitals then is they wait until they're about to die and then they go to the hospital and die, basically. The general how hospitals work there.
When I'd heard that it wasn't open every day, like they didn't take people every day.
Yeah, I mean, just because of their corruption, bureaucratic system, nothing is set and stable all the time. There's always maybe the doctors don't show up that day. It's the same with the schools. Sometimes teachers don't show up. It's not as organized, I got the feeling. And just overall not as good.
So as you were there and you saw how they use medicine, how is the medicine used in the missions in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, so the clinic they have in Goroka is the only free healthcare, and as far as the eye can see, basically. So that's a huge need, because a lot of times they can't afford just to go for any little thing that they have. So they wait until it's really serious where you might not be able to help them then. Mm-hmm. So it's probably a lower level step where they can go and get a lower level healthcare that keeps them, kind of maintains, so you don't have the bigger problems. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of things, someone in Papua New Guinea will get a headache. And, in America, we think, take an aspirin or something like that. But they don't even have, they maybe have access to get aspirin or something at a pharmacy, but they don't know that, they don't make that connection. They just don't have the knowledge for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So they wait until they have a serious problem because they have so much pressure kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's being able to educate a little bit and just help in some small way. And then they always preach to the patients at the beginning of every day when they come in. So I think several people are getting saved through that kind of continuously. Because a lot of times, a big part of what Lori Smith does, she kind of specializes in children now that she's there. So she does a lot of care with nursing mothers and prenatal care. So you have people coming in, every week maybe for vaccines and things like that. Mm-hmm. So they're being continuously exposed to the gospel.
Mm-hmm. So they also do mobile clinics that go into the villages. How are they doing something different than the clinic, or are they doing something different than the clinic?
A lot of times they're going pretty far out. So even while I was there, they went to a super remote part of Papua New Guinea. They had to fly in these little bitty propeller planes, and they just take as much medication as they can, because the people there really just don't have access even to a hospital. Mm-hmm. And then what they said is the church there that they went and set up the clinic near, they normally have 40 people on a Sunday. And they said after while the clinic was there, and then after the clinic left, they're having hundreds of people were coming to their church after that. So it meets a huge need, and obviously nothing is really enough. All right. But any small bit really helps.
Mm-hmm. So is that something that the two nurses there go out?
Yes.
For those? Okay. I know also that the clinic is on the grounds of a Bible school, mm-hmm. and you did a little bit to help at least some of the professors at the Bible school. So how did that fit into your life while you were there?
Yeah. It was really especially good, as I was getting over being sick the first bit, and when I got sick again, then I couldn't do a lot of going places and doing things, so I was able to help. So which one a big thing, it was I think they're finishing up one of their last semesters for a lot of their seniors, and they're also having new incoming freshmen. So I went through all of their transcripts that I know would have take forever for Bill Smith, who would be in charge of that sort of thing, to do all this. And it would have been a big job. And he is busy. He has a lot of stuff, and it's not super high on his priority list. But just making sure all the seniors have all the classes they need to graduate, and putting the freshmen into the system, things like that. I can tell. I went through all of the transcripts 4 times. So it would just been a huge job. And I don't have as much responsibility as a lot of people had there.
How many students are actually at the Bible college?
I heard somewhere around 40 students.
And you'd said they come from all over Papua New Guinea. Mm-hmm. So how did they hear about the Bible college?
That I'm not as clear. I know a lot of it is people will have come for whatever reason, they heard about it, and they'll go back to their villages, and they're also telling, hey, you want to go to Bible college? Well, there's this one I know. So I know a lot of their students, their parents went to the same Bible college. That was a continuing story that I heard. So I think probably word of mouth is big. I'm not sure what else they do.
And how many teachers do they have?
That's one of the needs I think they have. They could use as many teachers as they could get. It might be as many as 10, but I doubt it's that many, maybe 5, 7, something like that.
Are they mostly missionaries, or do they have some people that...
No, I would say they have probably like 2 or 3 teachers that are missionaries, and the rest are all nationals.
Mm-hmm. And the nationals were mostly trained there in that school, or did they go off somewhere else?
That I didn't really hear. I would assume, but yeah, I don't know that for sure.
Okay. So you were there, and you learned a little bit about the medical side of it, and it wasn't quite what you were thinking, but do you feel like it answered questions that you had?
Yeah, I mean, it basically makes it so that if I want to go into medical missions, I'm not going to end up being a paramedic. So that means I don't need to be pursuing paramedicine if I want to be a missionary doing medicine. So that kind of just, it makes it very clear what I need to do if I want to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's basically like you decide whether I want to be going to nursing, and if I don't want to do that, then I don't want to be a medical missionary, basically, is how it kind of
Doctor.
puts it.
Doctor.
Well, yeah. But I'm going for the lower level first. So yeah, that's very clear. So that means if I want to do medical missions, then I really need to be praying and thinking about going to nursing, mm-hmm. which was just, I was totally not thinking about that even remotely before.
Right. Yeah. So overall, after being there, I mean, you learned a lot about at least the way they do medical missions, but then you also saw a lot of how the missionaries there are what they're doing. What is your view of missions? Are you consider, I don't know what you call it, regular missions, but missions without the medical part,
yeah,
more after going to Papua New Guinea, or just think more something else?
Yeah, I would like, I mean, I really wasn't thinking about it before at all. And so now it's more something that I feel like I should think about. At this point in my life, I feel like don't feel like I'm not ready for just living out on my own kind of thing. And that's how I feel like just being a missionary is, because with medical missions, you have a job that you're doing also. Kind of, I feel like that centers it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So just even thinking about just becoming a normal missionary is like, yeah, that's a little too much for me to think about now. But I think probably as I grow older and get used to doing more things on my own, that would get easier to imagine. But yeah, I can't say at this point.
Well, and there's a process too. I mean, most people today that begin don't start out completely on their own. You would mm-hmm. have years of working with somebody and have something that's more of a set ministry.
Yeah. And also just one thing from being there and seeing things, I think it would be hard to go there and see all this need and not be able to help in other ways too.
Right. And that's always the case. I mean, the medical missions, really, it's about the missions. It's just there is a medical need, and we want to help with that because we care about people and want to see them taken care of, but there's a bigger need than the medical mm-hmm. need. So, yeah. So you grew up in Japan, mm-hmm. and then you haven't spent a lot of time in a third world country, but a little bit. What were the big differences that stood out to you?
I mean, and I think it would change somewhat if you were like in the capital. Papua New Guinea is bigger, more urban area. So Goroka is very rural. The town is pretty small, and then you get out into just nothing pretty quickly after the town. So I can't speak for third world bigger cities, but in the country, I mean, yeah, everything's dirt. You see where people are living; they just don't have a lot. And part of it is I feel like they could live better according to our standards if they knew what it was and wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of times they just live. It's very simple. A lot of things are harder to get, the commodities, things like that. I mean, water is in itself is just a whole other issue, especially for us as foreigners coming in.
Mm-hmm. Well, my understanding in Goroka, most things have to be flown in, or just about everything, because I was told that either there's not a road or it takes so long that it's not practical.
Yeah, I think so they do fly some things in, certainly. But I think another avenue they use is there's a town not that far, in driving distance, maybe a 5-hour drive from Goroka, that is a coastal town, so they can also ship things, I know. So a few times when I was there, some missionaries drove down to get like a container that had been shipped there.
Okay, so there is a road to other parts. Okay, that definitely affects life. I mean, in Japan, everything's available just like it is in America or Europe. It doesn't matter what you want. You just get online and order it from Amazon. It's not that way in many parts of the world.
Yeah, and like whatever you want to call it, PNG time, international time, whatever, is definitely a thing. So just a lot of things you just expect it to be twice as slow as you think it should be. So a lot of things it makes it more complicated because of the just corruption and inefficiency of a lot of things.
So what were the cultural differences that stood out to you? Things that say, oh, that's different.
I mean, everyone's just very friendly, which is very different than like Japan, which I've been the most. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a totally different setting, so it's kind of hard you just kind of go into a different frame of mind, I guess.
What's always healthier when you're thinking about missions or when you go to some place like that that's different, to have very few expectations because it is just different. And if you have expectations, then you sometimes don't see what's there because you're too busy noticing what's not there.
Yeah, and I think that I wasn't there long enough to get a lot of cultural differences, really. And like, I'm on the campus of the Bible College. I did do quite a bit with the missionaries there, so I was somewhat insulated probably than a lot of the cultural differences. And like, I had the opportunity to go and stay for a weekend with a pastor in like a really rural village setting, but I got sick that week, so I wasn't able to go.
So after going, do you think you would be interested in going back to somewhere like Papua New Guinea for a trip, whether it's medical or otherwise?
Yeah. At this point, it's like I have more questions than I need to pray and think through before it'd be so useful, I think. So it just kind of depends how you value or how you would think how valuable it would be. At this point, it's like imagining, like, say, going back to Papua New Guinea or something. It's like, well, I still have, like, I have the questions that I need to be asking, but I still don't have the answers. So it's kind of like.
So how do you think the answers come?
I mean, you have to think about it and think, well, would I really want to do this? Because, I mean, at this point, it's just like, well, I'm so not thinking about that. So for me, I do think about things before I do them, and helps me to think, well, how I feel about it, and I think about it more. And then, I mean, if you decide that, hey, I mean, this is something that could happen, and what are the other options? So if you don't see any obvious other steps, then it's like, we'll just try taking another step that direction and see what happens, kind of. So, like, if I decided, well, maybe I will go more nursing route, I mean, the next step is a registered nurse, which is not quite a practitioner yet, but one more step closer, and then
go in that direction.
Yeah, and that would give you a really good idea if this is something I'd be interested in. And then once you get to that point, you can look more into mission side of it and think, well, now, well, how do I feel about this? Things like that. And a lot of it is just you're living, should be growing as a Christian, and other things will come up, doors will open, you'll talk to people, and you kind of get shaped through those kind of things.
Yeah, I think what I always tell people, you have to be, first and foremost, just pursuing Christ-likeness, so you're looking to grow. And as you grow, then you're, every little bit you grow makes you a little bit better equipped to answer the questions you're asking. And sometimes I think people get stuck. It's like they're just kind of waiting until the answer just appears to them, and like they're writing on the wall, instead of pursuing growth, which would allow them to maybe be more sensitive to God's leading or see the answer clearer.
Yeah, and how I've tried to think about it is to never just be like, okay, well, I have a bunch of options, and I'll just wait until I decide which one. I try to think, well, maybe I have a bunch of options, but which one do I see myself going down more, and then start heading toward one. So then if you never decide, you at least end up somewhere.
Right. And I think a lot of people do. They have options, and maybe they're paralyzed by having too many options. So they just wait. Maybe they pray about it, but they wait, and options start disappearing. And then eventually you just don't have any more options. And oh, well, this must be God's will. And, I think that's one way to do it. But I do believe that God gave us intellect and a will and creativity and all these things. So as we evaluate the options, to consider how God made us and what God's calling us to. And I think what you're talking about is a healthy way to do it, to pursue something and say, well, God's capable of closing doors. And you learn lessons along the way that may help you. And sometimes that lesson is, this is not for me. I mean, that can be really clear. Or you see other open doors as you pursue one. Like, oh, I didn't know that was there. Yeah. Because it wasn't from where you were, but in the new place it is.
Yeah, and I definitely, I feel like it's bad to be paralyzed by having options. And me personally, I'm not scared of all the options. I'm scared of not having the options, I suppose. So I would be, if I feel like, oh no, some of the options are starting to go away, then I'd feel more pressure to pick an option before I feel like I'm having fewer.
Yeah, I'm stuck. This is what I have to do. Yeah, I think it's good to, to recognize the things that God is doing in all of us. So I know for a lot of people, they're kind of waiting on some balloon to drop out of the sky with a note from God telling them what they're supposed to do, rather than recognize God's given us a lot of what we're supposed to do. And if I'm doing those things today while I'm kind of evaluating the future, I'm taking steps towards something. You should never have a place where you're not moving at all. It's like, and I know even as I think about where I am in my life now, I still need to be growing. I still need to be pursuing Christ-likeness and growing as a disciple maker and growing in my relationships. And there's still new skills that I need to be working on, or skills that I should have that are not very good, not very well developed. So I have lots of things that I'm working on. As I'm working on those, you still pray about the future. You still are asking God, what's the next step? And I don't see it, so I'm going to work on the things that I know to work on today, but I'm going to keep looking and keep trying to figure out what that next step is and keep moving rather than get stuck.
Yeah. I think it's very freeing to know that God's not going to let you get stuck in some mission that he doesn't want you in. So like if you're legitimately trying to serve God, he's not going to be like, oh, well, I mean, they started heading toward missions, so I guess they're going to be there. I really wanted them to do this other thing, but since they took off and did that, it doesn't happen like that.
This interview with Cameron continues in the second half of the show, so hang around and we'll be right back as we consider a little more about his trip to Papua New Guinea and his next steps as he considers Bible college and the future of what ministry and life looks like for him. And hopefully there's a lesson for all of us. We'll be right back. Well, I think everyone should assume that God wants to use them in some kind of ministry, whether it's how they make a living or not. That's a different question. But not just assume. God absolutely tells us that we all have a work of ministry. So the question is, what is that? And not to divorce that from the rest of our life. And I think some people do. They have, I'm doing this because this is my career, and then I'm also kind of wondering about ministry stuff. There's two different things, but there's one life, and I think God is in all of it. It's not different compartments, and often we're good at putting God in a box and saying, well, I'll get you out of the box when I need you, but I'm busy right now.
Yeah, and I know I have the tendency to be focused too much on the career aspect of it, be like, oh, what am I going to do? How is this going to work? So what I've been trying to do more recently is just think I think everyone knows where God wants people to go. There's a lot of people say, well, someone should do that. But so we all kind of know what those things are, but then start heading in one of those directions and, the rest of it will fall in place. But not focus so much on the career, because you need people who are doing careers to be a light also, but I think we need more people that are thirsting for missions and finding the career after that, kind of viewing it more from the other way.
Yeah, it's just easy to be distracted by the way that everyone around you looks at life. Yeah. And everyone's looking for things that will make them happy or fulfilled, and all these things which they're temporary goals that take over eternal goals. They don't have any eternal goals. They're just to make it through the day, or to make enough money to buy something that's going to rust or break one day. And instead of recognizing that, it's like I read an article one time, or maybe it was in a book, but they talked about Christianity can be summed up as relationships. I mean, a relationship with God, our relationship with the church, our relationship with the world, and that's really where life is. So a lot of our relationships are what we should be pursuing, is saying, how do I do well at my relationships? If I'm doing that, I'm going to be in a better place to answer some of the other questions. And God wants me to do well at my relationships. He wants me to pursue Him. But we don't spend enough time thinking about what it means to pursue God. And we see that as something completely different than career or family, where it's not. That's they're very much together. We've tried to do that with our family and say, well, God has called us, all of us, into missions. So we told you guys that when you were kids. Like, God called you into missions because He gave you to us. So clearly, this is where you're supposed to be. So sometimes people don't do that, and they let their kids think, well, you'll figure your stuff out later. This is, and they fight against maybe what God's doing instead of saying, hey, this is where God has you. He may take you somewhere else, but this is clearly where He has you today, and we can embrace that and learn the lessons He has for us today. Even like Papua New Guinea, you may not go back to Papua New Guinea, but you learn things that are valuable that one day you go, I'm glad I went because I learned those things.
Yeah, and I know something that I've more recently been trying to think about is really just like, I feel like if the answer to the question, what do you think you're going to do with your life, basically? I mean, what are you going to do? People ask you that so often when you're in high school, college. If the answer is ever, I don't really know, then you should just kind of assume ministry, and, things will change. Maybe you'll realize you're unsuited for that or whatever, but that time will never be wasted. And I feel like it's a lot easier to go to some career that becomes more obvious after you've been starting toward ministry than if you just go to college and be like, well, I guess I'll just study to be an engineer or something like that. It's really hard then to go back to ministry.
Well, and ministry is always what God's called you to. So getting equipped for that, even if you end up making a living doing something else, that's still valuable time preparing, where it's easy to prepare for a career and then you've never prepared for ministry, but you were supposed to have one. But it's really hard to take the time when you're an engineer and have kids and now you're in debt and like, well, I made some choices along the way that made ministry much harder than it was supposed to be, where if we'd put ministry first in the beginning, we wouldn't have made some of those choices.
Yeah, and I think it's something that like all Christians should be thinking about. Their ministry and the career should be way second. But a lot of people just think like everyone else does, where they go, what career are you going to get? And, you'll be a Christian and light there. It was something, you can say that, but that just means that puts the center more on the career. Whereas I just feel like, yeah, I mean, we all know we're called to be ministry, and life is short. Jesus is coming back. Everyone needs to know this. If you really know how lost everyone is and how important this is, then the career just becomes so secondary, and it should be so much secondary. But it's just so easy that so many people are centered more in the career, which is just like the world does, like everyone else.
I know one of the things that we talked about it more in terms of like our family, but thinking about having children and helping them. It's like, well, we don't ever want to make a choice that's going to make it harder for us to help our children follow Jesus. Or I don't ever make a choice that's going to make it harder for me to pursue the things that Paul tells Timothy, godliness and righteousness. If that's not high on your priority list or high on your understanding, then you eventually ask it, but you've already asked questions that about career and finances and all these other things that if you make the choice based on finances, you make one choice. If you make the choice based on, is this going to help me pursue Jesus, you make a different choice. So I think we have to put that choice first, and the things that are going to make it harder, I just knock those off the list. And that's kind of the way I've tried to approach my life once I understood that was kind of the goal. Like, I need to be pursuing Jesus. There's nothing else. I mean, I'm not going to stand at the end of my life, when I'm on my deathbed even, and say, what do you wish you had done more of? Well, I'm not going to wish I'd made more money. I'm not going to wish when I stand before God that I had been more successful in career of some kind. And I think we recognize that and say, well, I want to make the choices now that are going to make it easier for me to pursue Jesus. That means for some people, there are jobs that, hey, this is a really good job. It's going to pay a lot of money, but you're not going to be able to go to church very much. Okay, that's probably not a good choice. If your choice, if your priority is to pursue Christ, then not being with his family is probably not a good thing. So there are a lot of choices like that are practical. And sometimes people feel like, well, it's just not practical to pursue ministry and to pursue. No, it's very practical. If you really understand what God's word says, you really understand eternal values, then it's very practical when you come down to the decisions you make. Should I buy this car? Well, you're going to be in debt, which means you're going to have to work more, which is going to take time away from other things, where you could get the cheaper car and you're not required to do quite as much. So instead of overtime, you could have time with leading the youth group or to be part of this other ministry. It's like, well, that's a practical choice that makes a real difference in who you are. It makes a difference in your checkbook too, but the bigger difference is that it changes who you are. And that's one reason I think it's good for you to go on this trip. Like last year, you went to Bolivia, and this year to Papua New Guinea. That changes who you are. As you see people who are in need and see practical ways that we can help them. That contrast deeply with a lot of people's mindset where they're out for what I can get and how I can be comfortable. Because you see, people you can be comfortable with a lot less than we are. And that changes the way you view the world. And that should change the way you make some of your choices too. Do I really need, a 5,000 foot square house? I mean, that's a massive house. Is the cost and the time to pay for it and all those things, is that going to be worth it? Well, for some people it is because it's part of their ministry. Other people it's like, well, you'd be better off, living in a trailer and being involved in the ministry. You'd be a better person. I think that's something a lot of people don't recognize because they start earlier and their family pushes them to be successful, however you define that, which to me that's not a good metric to use. We evaluate our life. Are you successful? Like, well, let's look at what the New Testament says. If so, well, are you pursuing holiness and righteousness and godliness, and are you kind? Look at the one another's. How are you doing at those? I mean, that's a successful life. But it's hard to make those choices consistently over time. But trips like this, I think, are valuable. I guess that's one of my questions. It's overall, what would you say that you learned from this trip? Even not specifics like questions you have to ask about medicine, but just in general life and going forward now as you're going back to college. What are lessons or things that you've learned that you think were valuable?
Yeah, I mean, I just think when you go out and see the mission field, for one thing, it brings about things that were in theory more up front in the face, and you can see them more clearly. And so I think kind of a combination of going to Papua New Guinea, and then I read The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken. And just when you really get a better idea of how lost the world is, then it's really hard to then just go back and be like, okay, well, now I'll just live my life and work or something and lose sight of that again. It really, you like, but now I've always been thinking about, if you go and find a job or something like that, and then comparing that with like some believer like in China back in the 1900s when this book was written. I'm just thinking, them, or are they just going and working? And if they do that, then, they're just so different there, and they're putting their Christianity so far ahead of everything else. They're laying a lot out to be a Christian, and so the cost was great for them, and you see what they did, whereas the cost is not as much for us in America, and we don't use what we have. I don't know, it just really faces you with, what are you doing? And kind of, it's all this kind of the same thing where, everyone, like, how much you should be putting ministry first. And, sometimes if you're not thinking that way, people say, oh, you should go into ministry. You immediately think of different things than the people in China maybe would. Whereas, all of them are in the ministry. They're all laying their life on the line to share the gospel with other people, learn and grow as a Christian. And so when we think ministry, we only think, pastor or missionary. You can't just be a normal person and be in ministry. But when you say that I want to be in ministry, that's really putting that first. And it's a big word, so it really forces you to, with that fact, that this should be way before anything else. When, and just a lot of people don't do that. And so when you're comparing this world, how much they need it, how many people aren't there, and then back here where it's like how many people aren't doing anything, and I don't know, it's just, you get to, when you see more of the world, you get a bigger picture of everything, because you can stay in America and just be like, oh, well, all these people don't want it, and it's just like, it can be kind of discouraging when people are like so anti-Christian or whatever. I've heard all that before, I don't need that. And so you can think, well, the whole world is kind of like this. So, I mean, you just kind of struggle, do a job, whatever, to give a word here and there with your coworkers when you can. You can get into that mindset when you then hear stories that go different places in the world and realize, everyone here, they don't have anything. They're super open, It's just a lot different when you're looking at things from a more world perspective.
Yeah, often in the United States, we see the whole world from the United States as the center of the world perspective. It makes it blinds us to a lot. And then the bigger picture, thinking about ministry, I think a healthy way for us to view that is that we're all supposed to be disciple makers. Are you supposed to be a pastor who is a disciple maker, or a missionary who is a disciple maker, or a plumber who is a disciple maker? That doesn't take away from what's most important. I think what Jesus called all believers to is to be Christ-like, and we use that term without really identifying it. And I would say as you look at what actions go with it, it means helping other people to follow Jesus and be on mission, and that's on his mission. And to do that, we're disciple makers. So to put that first, to really put it first, means it affects our decisions. It affects what we do, it affects what we read, it affects where we go. And I think personally that the potential for real joy in your life comes from pursuing Jesus in those things and using our gifts in those things, versus a career or all the other things, hobby or things that people can pursue, because those things ultimately they're not going to satisfy. They may give you a little bit of happiness for a while. You may get people's accolades, but ultimately the thing that we want to have is to stand before God and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And we do that when we pursue the ministry he set before us, which would be discipling and building up the church. So equipping and edifying the church to be on the mission of Jesus, which would be making disciples who are able to be on the mission of Jesus, of taking that message of reconciliation to the world. So it to go from that's a theory and that's out there and something we should think about to practically, what am I doing? How do I live that is important.
And you really don't want to go when the time comes, you go to heaven and say, well, I was a really good accountant.
Yeah.
When it's just like, if that's what you were living your life for, it's worth, like as Paul said, less than like dung is the word that he uses. So we can get caught up in stuff that, you can say, and we kind of know, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. That part doesn't matter. But if that part doesn't matter, why is that 99% of your life?
Yeah, we spend so much time pursuing things that if we get right down to it, as a Christian would say, well, yeah, it's not that important. But we spend a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of money on things that if we get right down to it, we would acknowledge that, no, it doesn't really matter. So that's hard. It's hard for us to be a good example to the world when that's the way that we live and we pursue the same things that they do. So I guess you're looking at then going to Faith Baptist Bible College in the fall, and you haven't been there in person. So I would think particularly after coming back from a missions trip and kind of learning some different lessons that you'd be a little better prepared mentally to be in that space. So how are you feeling about going to Bible college this fall?
Yeah, definitely more. I've just been faced with a lot of, what am I actually doing? What is kind of the same questions, what actually matters? So more eager to go into it thinking more ministry, which I wasn't really before. I'm thinking about it more from, everyone should be doing ministry. So how can I, and even it was interesting seeing the Bible college in Goroka and versus what I've seen of Faith Baptist Bible College. And it's like, they going in Goroka when they're going to the Bible college, they really want to learn this stuff because it's the stuff that they're going to need to be going out and ministering in churches and being pastors and things like that. So I definitely want to think about it more from that aspect, not to just, okay, I have to go get an education and maybe something will come up kind of.
Well, they're assuming they're going to use it. And I think a lot of people go to Bible college not really assuming they're going to use very much that they're learning. Oh, it's just good for me to go and hear this. And that's really not why people started the Bible colleges. And that's certainly not why people in places like Goroka go. I mean, they're going because this message is life-changing, and I want to be equipped to help other people to pursue Jesus well and to live lives of value so that when they stand before him, they will hear, well done, good and faithful servant. So they see the value in putting real energy and effort into growing. And they see it as a time when this is a special time. God has blessed me and given me the opportunity to learn and grow, and I'm going to make good use of it, where a lot of people start out, at least in Bible college, without that. And some get there, and some never do. And that's a shame, because it is the same here as there. It's an opportunity to prepare, and a lot of our preparation now, we won't have a second opportunity. So to gain that now and be able to be a little more equipped for whatever ministry God has for us in the future is a huge it's a huge mindset change if you could really grasp that this is an opportunity to help me be the person God wants me to, and equip me for whatever ministry God has for you. You know, part of his plan is to equip you, and he's doing that partly through something like this. So, not to mention, like another big part of it for most people that go, you do develop relationships with other people who are looking at ministry, and you have opportunity to encourage each other and sometimes challenge each other, and you also meet people who are in ministry that come to the school and share different things that they're doing. I mean, that's kind of how you got started with Bolivia. We were at the missions conference 2 years ago, and here's something like, oh, well, that sounds like that might be interesting. It's just you have an opportunity to hear about other kinds of ministry and see other different types of people and how they're used, because everybody doesn't do it the same way, even in a similar ministry, to recognize God can use your gifts. So that's a big part of approaching God with open hands and saying, hey, this is how you've made me. How do you want to use me now?
Yeah. Now I'm like, I want to go and talk to all these college students who say they don't know what they want to do. I have answers for you.
Well, that's part of the benefit of getting out there and learning the lessons, both as a MK, growing up in another country, and then the value of going on mission trips, which you kind of grew up on a mission trip, going to Bolivia and Papua New Guinea and be involved in seeing different people. There are conversations you'll be able to have that will be very helpful to people. And so to be, to be praying that God would help you to have good conversations, because it's easy to have poor ones, and sometimes we're too focused on the wrong things. But how do we support other people in their growth? And that's sometimes being patient and realize they're not ready for everything yet, and being kind and supporting them and encouraging them. Like Paul had very kind and encouraging words sometimes, and other times, at the right time, had some stronger words, but to pray for graciousness to relate well and encourage people from the things that you've learned. So I think you'll have a lot of opportunities for those at Faith, particularly because it is a place where a lot of people are asking those questions. So that's a good thing. So as you get ready for your junior year at Faith, then you have 2 years. What are you looking forward to most going to Bible college?
I mean, just like, I feel like that atmosphere, all those people, I think like it's just a good place to be growing and asking some tougher questions and really seeking out, where do I feel like God's leading? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure totally what to expect, but I just think it'll be a good time of, I mean, you're surrounded by so many people who are, saying important things you need to hear. They have guest speakers and things. I think it's a good time to get like a bigger picture of what a lot of people are doing. And I think it gives at least the opportunity for God to pull something out and be like, hey, look at this.
Yes, it is one of those places where you're saying, hey, I'm here to see what you have for me, and God's often in that context says, hey, what about this? So yeah, good. So as you go, I know one of the things you'll have opportunity to learn a lot about the biblical foundation, meet different people, and also next steps. So, do you have any? I don't want to say concerns, but what's the thing that you are most concerned about? I don't know, I use a different word, but that's all I can think of. Going to Faith this fall, because you haven't been there in person. You've had a long year with a lot of changes. I know that's the big thing in your life, going from Japan to America, and then EMT training, and then Papua New Guinea, and all this has been a year of changes. Your first job, and then living on your own, sort of.
Yeah, probably just that. I mean, there's a lot of things I would like to do, and so he's afraid that you would miss out on what we just talked about, the experience of learning these things by trying to do too much, and then you miss out like talking to people and things like that. That's I don't want that to happen, but I don't know how everything will pan out with different things that I would like to do.
Right. Well, it is important to make some kind of priority list. It's like what's really important to me. And I know I'm probably a weird parent maybe in some ways, because I told Chloe and then you too, like the grades are not the big thing. You want to learn, but that's different than grades. And a big part of being there is to invest in those conversations and people. And that is a lot of what you'll learn. You'll learn at least as much from some of those relationships that are not in a classroom than you will from the classes. So to be aware of that and make sure that you don't fill your time every day, all day with work and study. And, a big issue with a lot of people in Bible college is that they read the Bible and related books so much for classes that then they don't leave time really to pursue him themselves. So I know that's one thing that I would encourage, and it's true for missionaries and pastors too, where they're always preparing for somebody else or for something else instead of for themselves. You have to pursue God yourself first and learn the things that he has for you so that you're able to be the person he wants you to be first and foremost. And I think that's hard for us sometimes. I know that's my goal. I want to keep pursuing him myself and know that then I have enough to give because I'm sharing what God's taught me. But I do remember being in seminary and it's like, well, you have to read so many chapters a day. And I was like, and I think thinking back, I probably would have been better off to get up in the day and put him first and say, well, I might not do as well on my test, but I'm going to do this first consistently. And so that's one thing you have to keep in mind, and then look for those opportunities to serve both on campus, other people, but then to find a church where you're really involved and able to be part of God's family while you're there. Those are two big things. So for all of you, you and your two sisters are all going to be gone this fall. You'll all be at Faith. So it's kind of a different thing for me and Mom. But since you've had a kind of in some ways a stressful year because you were lots and lots of new things, leaving the country where you grew up and all these things, is there, I don't know, do you have any, what would you call it, things that you're really looking forward to after you've had a year of kind of transition year? Now this will be more like I'm starting to settle into something I'm anticipating it's going to be at least similar for the next year and maybe the next 2 years. Is there anything you're looking forward to in that?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience doing that. I mean, yeah, like in Japan for a while we were pretty settled, I feel like, and then a bunch of crazy stuff happened for the last, 4 years, something like that. So it feels like, and then it hasn't stopped. So I don't know. It would probably be nice to take a step back and have a chance to, not be learning as much. That sounds weird, to go to college not to be learning as much, but
different kinds of lessons.
Yeah,
life lessons.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to expect.
All right.
It's been a ride.
Yes. It has been. There's been a lot of changes in all of our lives in the last 2 years particularly. But all right, well, thanks for giving us an update. I know for me and Mom at least, we will be praying for you and looking forward to hearing how God grows you in the next year. And for people that are considering what they might do in next steps, whether it's Bible college or some other kind of training, let me encourage you. You want to have the right priorities. It is pursuing God yourself first, whatever else you might do to pursue Him. That means, and that comes in the daily choices. It's the same for Bible college or career. The daily choice to put Christ first is a consistent choice. So it's to make the practice of choosing Him above other things. I often use the illustration of exercise. I don't really like running, but I set myself up to be able to do it consistently. Otherwise, I wouldn't. So I have a goal, and I have everything that I need to do that, and I have a plan to do it, and I make it easy for myself, and I talk to other people about it. So sometimes we run together or exercise together. So I know it's important for me, so I do the things to be successful at it. The question is, what does that look like in your spiritual life? You want to pursue Christ-likeness. What does that look like? So practically, the big 3 things that I keep coming back to, it means time in God's Word, it means time praying, and it means time with God's family, talking about real things. And some of that's the practical application of God's Word. So if you're consistently keeping those things in your life, then you're in a good place. And then it's just a matter of consistency. It's difficult. But put Him first and keep pursuing His best. And it's one step at a time. Okay, we've been considering doctrine at the end of each show recently. And today, this month, we're on the Christology, the doctrine of Jesus. And today I want to look specifically at His death and 3 things that were accomplished in the death of Christ. Now, there was a lot accomplished, and we could take a whole year and just discuss the implications of the death of Christ on the cross. But today I want to look at 3 specific things that I think are important. I guess all of it's important, but I still have to limit it, so bear with me. The death of Jesus on the cross. The first thing, we use the big word, the 50-cent word, propitiation. What we mean is His death on the cross satisfied the wrath of God against us. Because we were sinners, God was justifiably angry with us. We were under His wrath. Well, 1 John 4:10 says, "In this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins." So He sent His Son to satisfy this wrath that was justifiably there because God is a just God. And we could not do this ourselves. And that's one thing that we want to come back to with the 3 things we look at today and everything concerning the death of Jesus on the cross. They were not things that we could do. There's nothing that you could do to satisfy the wrath of God against you because of sin, but He did that for you, and He did that because He loved you, and it's something that only Jesus could do. So first thing is propitiation. He satisfied that wrath, justified wrath of God against us. And because the wrath was taken away, then the rest of the work was possible. So redemption, we could define that as the work of Christ on our behalf, again, on the cross, where He purchased us, or sometimes you'll read that He ransomed us. At the price of His own life, His blood, He ransomed us. He secured our deliverance from the bondage and condemnation of sin. So many people would use the illustration of the old slave markets and say we were purchased from the slave market of sin. We were under the rule of sin. Sin was our master. We could do nothing else. But we were redeemed so that now we have new options. Now we can actually respond to God. So He purchased us. He ransomed us from that. 1 Peter 1:18 and 19. Knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by the tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot. So here we were redeemed by His blood. Again, we're purchased from that slavery of sin. We were under this dominion of sin and the flesh. We were purchased from that, redeemed from that. So now we are free for the first time in our life. And because of that, then the last thing we want to consider today is reconciliation, having fellowship and peace with God where once there was wrath. So that fellowship and peace is not possible without Christ. Romans 5:10-11. For if when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. And not only that, but we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received the reconciliation. So this is an amazing turnaround if you think about it. We've gone from enemies of God to being reconciled and having fellowship. And not just that, really we could go on and say we have been adopted then is another thing that was accomplished into the family of God. So today, what was accomplished on the cross? Propitiation, God's wrath was satisfied. Redemption, we were purchased from this bondage of sin. And reconciliation, we were made to have peace with God, fellowship with God, where once there was wrath. You know, that work that Jesus did on the cross, restoring our relationship with God and placing us into his family, also gave us a mission and purpose in life. Well, Cameron's trip to Papua New Guinea is part of that mission. Well, your relationship with people in your community is also part of that mission. How are you intentionally living out that mission this week? We all have a part to play. You may have one key relationship that you need to focus on. Other people might have many more. They might have more responsibilities in this mission, but you have a part. God has given you gifts to play. How are you intentionally living out that mission this week? Thanks for joining me again today. If you've enjoyed the show, you can listen to all the past shows wherever you listen to podcasts. A good place to start is at runwithhorses.net. You can also write me, Norman@runwithhorses.net, or leave a comment on the podcast Facebook page. But whatever you do, take time today, pause, thank God for his work in your life, and whatever you do, don't stop. Keep running.